So I just watched the new Demon Slayer movie and it was really good. It was so insane that I believe it is actually a record-breaking performance, has gone over $70 million in the US, which is the best opening for any anime movie, and it's already surpassed Mugen Train in terms of just grossing worldwide, which is absolutely insane to hear. And obviously, if you've been following Demon Slayer, you know that the production team behind this, the animation studio, is Ufotable. They have been doing absolutely insane work. If you've watched Fate Zero, that is also their work, or Fate Stay Night, unlimited budget works. Those Fate Heaven Feel movies are absolutely stunning. And as always, they bring the amazing CGI with really well animated and choreographed fights to another level with the Infinity Castle arc. Really fun first movie. I had a blast watching it. And if you're gonna watch it, I would highly recommend going to a theater, especially some kind of like IMAX viewing, because the sound design in this movie was actually next level. And each fight did have some sort of kind of emotional backing that did make it good. However, the way that Demon Slayer goes about its emotional backing is kind of the crux of the problem that I have with Demon Slayer as a whole. And when I say that Demon Slayer has a problem, it's not necessarily just this movie, because I honestly think Ufotable did as much as is reasonable. It's impossible to elevate it even more than they already could. The bigger problem is just the inherent story structure that is taken from the manga. It's just too reliant on flashbacks. And I'm sure you guys have heard this complaint over and over again. And if you've watched Demon Slayer, this is not really a new thing. The story has been doing this for almost every single arc, almost every single fight, and that's kind of my big issue, is that it's repetitive. The biggest problem is that when an emotional climax happens, it feels like we are immediately thrust into a new flashback to make that emotional climax hit even harder, which in some cases works absolutely amazingly, and in some cases just feels a little forced and not really well timed. This is where I'm going to get into a bit of spoilers for the movie, so just be warned if you haven't seen it yet. Akaza's backstory was absolutely amazingly done. A little drawn out, albeit. However, I do think Akaza's backstory was probably the best we've ever seen in a Demon Slayer story arc. When he has to stop himself from regenerating, oh my god, there was chills. Okay, I got chills. So when Demon Slayer does it well, it does it really well. However, I have a lot of problems with the Zenitsu fight and also the Shinobu fight in terms of flashbacks. Specifically, the Zenitsu one felt like we could have been introduced to Kaigaku a long time ago. I feel like this kind of rivalry was really interesting to hear about, but it almost felt rushed and forced because we were just learning the key details about it as soon as the fight was going on. If we had learned about it maybe in a previous arc, then all those memories could come flashing back. So when that fight actually resolved, although I loved the visuals and I thought it resolved pretty well, I felt like there could have been a lot more emotional depth that came out of it. Same with Shinobu. I feel like learning about Doma and what he has done before Shinobu goes into that fight could have been a lot more interesting instead of just being immediately thrust into that flashback as soon as the fight starts. And listen, again, I understand that is Demon Slayer's kind of whole shtick, right? That's how they tell the story. But I'm a firm believer in the idea that stories should keep you on your toes. I feel like if these flashbacks were paired with more fleshed out characters, that would actually do a lot more to serve these emotional moments as well. Honestly, hot take here, I think we could have cut the Swordsmith arc for an arc that has more development focused on Zenitsu and Inosuke and their motivations. And I think if we had that, Zenitsu's fight would be so much more interesting as well. Maybe I'm just a boomer who likes things to be foreshadowed and then revealed later on, or, you know, some kind of a more rewarding way of telling the story. But again, these flashbacks just really didn't hit as hard as they could have. And one of my favorite examples of good foreshadowing has to be in Attack on Titan. As soon as we get, season 1, we already are given questions like what's in the basement? Why is Eren special? Even subtle things like Berthold and Reiner's reactions to certain things can actually be context clues when you rewatch the show, because they are then revealed later on, and it recontextualizes everything that you've seen up to that point, and it adds another layer of emotional depth that is just simply missing from Demon Slayer. How could the Demon Slayer movie fix this? Well, I think more hints about Akaza's backstory could have been thrown into the Rengoku fight. His sensei, maybe like a hairpin from his to-be fiance, before the full flashback kicks in at the very end. And not to say that the flashback in the Infinity Castle movie was bad. I actually thought it was probably the best we've seen again, but it could have been foreshadowed. We could have gotten a little more context clues. The way that it's presented just feels like the author was kind of writing things based on vibes, right? as soon as he gets to a cool fight, he's like, okay, well, how do I add more emotion to this fight? And while that is cool, you do need emotion backing the fights, right, to make them meaningful. Planning that stuff out beforehand and foreshadowing it is a way to make it hit even harder, right? At a core of any story is cause and effect. What does the character do to cause a certain action, and what effect does it have on the story? But when you have flashbacks that are used after the emotional moment already happens, it's kind of flipping this order. It's trying to make us feel something that we've already felt and amplify that effect even more by like going back in time and revealing something new. If we kind of knew this beforehand, then all of these things could build up in a more natural way. And in fact, I would argue that the best moments in Demon Slayer as an entirety are when they don't rely on these, random jumps or flashbacks that happen in the middle of battles. For example, Rengoku versus Akaza is probably my favorite fight in all of Demon Slayer. And not only do they let the fight play out, but the one big flashback that does happen, during a very climactic moment is short. It's sweet. It gives us even more emotional drive for that moment. And then we still just jump right back into the fight pretty quickly afterwards and reach even higher emotional notes because the flashback didn't take up a huge portion of that time. I didn't feel like I was completely transported to another place. And possibly this is where another season, or this movie being turned into a season of anime could have been better, although I still loved watching it on the big screen. But I think ultimately that is why I liked the Mugen Train movie a little bit more. Although as a whole, maybe it's not as interesting as some of the fights that happen in Infinity Castle, the actual emotional payoff that happens between Akaza and Rengoku and the aftermath between it makes it feel a lot more meaningful. And I'll be honest, I was not as invested in Shinobu's fight with Doma, nor was I as invested in her loss in comparison to Rengoku. I thought his fight was a lot more interesting. I thought his loss was a lot more heartbreaking. It didn't need a flashback. It hit hard because of the buildup that happened during the fight and before the fight, because they set it up properly. Now, again, these are kind of nitpicks, because overall, I actually think this was probably one of the best movies I've seen this year. Maybe only behind, I don't know, like F1. I mean, Hans Zimmer did the soundtrack for that. That was a good movie. But overall, like, I enjoyed the movie a ton. I thought Infinity Castle was absolutely amazing. I still think you should watch it. It's probably one of the best new-gen shonens out right now. The animation is absolutely at an insane level. I don't know how ufotable keeps doing it, but I'll be honest, I do think the plot kind of suffers a little bit because of its repetitive nature. And while overall this is one of the most polished anime movies I've seen in a very long time, I still think it falters due to some of these features, and I actually think Mugen Train was a little bit better in my opinion. Honestly, I felt more emotion during Mugen Train, but maybe that's just me. I felt like the flashbacks were a little too much. But again, Akaza's backstory, actual masterclass. That was probably one of the best ones we've got. It could have gotten some foreshadowing to make it a little bit better, but still, really, really solid. Overall, I don't want anyone to come away from this video thinking that I didn't like the movie. Like, I enjoyed it. I definitely enjoyed it. It is what it is. Maybe it's just my personal opinion. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. Make sure to like the video, subscribe, and peace.